All right, let's jump right into this explainer. Today we're dissecting an absolute bombshell of a story that's been sending massive shockwaves through Delhi's healthcare system. We're looking at a staggering medical procurement heist where public funds, we're talking anywhere from 600 to 700 crore rupees, were allegedly just siphoned right out of the system. This is taxpayer money meant for critical life-saving hospital supplies that seemingly vanish into a highly organized fraud network. So we're going to dive in and methodically unpack exactly how this was supposedly pulled off from the inside.
Here's our quick roadmap for how we're going to break this down. First, the heist itself. Second, the step-by-step anatomy of the scam. Third, the unbelievable price tags. Fourth, the alleged masterminds, and the main guy who's currently on the run. And finally, the massive fallout and where the probe is heading today.
So let's start with part one, the heist and the initial shock of the investigation.
700 crore rupees. Keep that number in your head because that is the sheer gravity-defying scale of the alleged fraud we're dealing with here. Basically, after a mountain of complaints started piling up about tenders for medicines, surgical items, and life-saving equipment, the Delhi Directorate of Vigilance finally decided they had to act. Over 2 nights in May, they launched these surprise raids at the Central Procurement Agency, the CPA. And what they found, or rather, what they didn't find, is what blew the lid completely off this operation.
Picture this. Vigilance officers walk into the CPA office on May 18th to secure the procurement records, and the most critical files are just gone, completely missing. The officials on the ground claimed that those records were in the personal custody of the former head of office, Dr. Vinod Kumar Ranga, and, conveniently enough, he couldn't be reached at the time. You know, this wasn't just a case of someone misplacing a folder. Investigators allege this was a deliberate, calculated attempt to obstruct accountability right out of the gate.
Which brings us to part two. The anatomy of the scam. How exactly do you hack a rigid government procurement system?
Well, they allegedly used a very specific 4-step playbook. Step 1. Set up a whole network of dummy shell companies. Step 2. Draft the technical requirements for the medical tenders so restrictively, like tailor-made for these shell companies, that genuine competitors literally couldn't even qualify to bid. Step 3. Once your dummy companies are the only ones left standing, you fast-track their secret approvals, sometimes on the exact same day, totally bypassing normal e-procurement workflows. And Step 4, and honestly this is the really clever part, they left the government's e-marketplace portal marked as active. So even after the contracts were awarded and the money was paid out, nobody from the outside could see the final, massively inflated rates.
And the contrast here is just wild. If you were a legitimate supplier, someone outside this alleged cartel, your payments were getting stalled for up to 2 whole years. 2 years! But if you were a supplier linked to the broker running this scheme, your payments were miraculously cleared in 1 or 2 days. It was essentially a perfectly rigged 2-tier system. All right, part 3, the price tag. Let's look at how much taxpayer money was actually drained here.
Let's ground these massive abstract numbers into everyday items. Portable X-ray machines that you could buy in the open market for about 10 lakh rupees, billed to the government for 33 lakh. Simple hospital bed sheets that retail for around 150 rupees were invoiced at 450 rupees. High-end C-arm radiological equipment jumped from a market price of 25 lakh to an absolutely staggering 1.10 crore rupees per unit. Even basic ORS sachets went from 2 rupees 50 paise to 15 rupees each. The sheer audacity of these markups is breathtaking.
I mean, that is a 500% inflation rate on ORS sachets alone. And how do you manage to buy 50 lakh of these overpriced packets without anyone noticing? By using a loophole. They bypass the standard, cheaper, state-level open tenders and use what are called local chemist tenders. Now, those are strictly meant for small, day-to-day emergency hospital needs. But by abusing that emergency loophole, they allegedly diverted hundreds of crores just on medicines. That's money meant for patient care just evaporating. But I think the most brazen trick is what we can call the X-ray anomaly. At first, the government floats a tender for just 2 portable X-ray machines. Now, for any major medical supplier, doing all the paperwork for just 2 machines isn't worth a headache, right? So they don't even bother bidding. But the moment the cartel's chosen firm is the only one left in the running, the order magically expands from 2 machines to 448 machines, all bought at that massively inflated 33 lakh rupee price tag. It's a classic bait and switch.
Let's move to part 4. Who were the masterminds, and who's the guy they still can't find?
Once the anti-corruption branch registered an FIR, we saw some very high-ranking officials get arrested. This includes Dr. Vatsala Aggarwal, the former Director General of Health Services. She's the one who allegedly gave the final green light to those skewed tender terms.
Then you have Dr. Vinod Kumar Ranga, the former head of the CPA, who supposedly presented the tailored documents to the committee, and Neeraj Chopra, the former deputy controller of accounts, whose office is accused of rapidly pushing through those massive payouts.
But all of that leaves us with a massive, glaring question: where is Rajiv Rangila? According to the FIR, Rangila is the central broker here. He's the liaison who allegedly set up the shell companies, colluded with manufacturers to hike up the rates, and actually prepared those restrictive technical sheets that the government officials then rubber-stamped. So while the officials are sitting in custody, the alleged architect of the whole thing is still out there.
And obviously, this missing piece has sparked an intense political crossfire. In a recent press conference, Delhi AAP Chief Sara Bharadwaj went right after the investigation, pointing out that lower-level staff are facing the music while the main accused is just gone. He flat out asked, where is Rajiv Rangila and why is the anti-corruption branch protecting him? The AAP's stance is that this was a deep-rooted conspiracy designed to lock out ordinary companies, and you can't unravel the whole thing until you catch the mastermind.
Finally, Part 5, the fallout, the administrative shakeup, and where the probe goes from here. The bureaucratic housecleaning has been brutal. 74 doctors have been transferred across different hospitals to smash these entrenched networks. A data assistant at the DGHS was flat out fired for allegedly leaking sensitive probe info to a private supplier. 2 junior assistants in stores and purchases were suspended. And the really big news, the Enforcement Directorate, the ED, has now stepped in. They're demanding the CPA records to investigate the massive money laundering side of this 350 to 700 crore rupee puzzle.
Now, pushing back against the AAP's criticisms, the BJP has mounted a strong defense of the process. Delhi BJP Chief Whip Abhay Verma argued that the current government acted incredibly fast here. He pointed out that they didn't wait for some external complaint. They took suo motu cognizance, meaning they acted on their own internal vigilance to get that FIR registered. So right now there's a fierce battle over who gets the credit for cleaning this up and who ultimately takes the blame for letting the rot set in.
But behind the political back and forth, the actual institutional mechanics are really fascinating. Lieutenant Governor Taranjit Singh Sandhu played a huge role here. Under Section 17A of the Prevention of Corruption Act, you normally can't file an FIR against a public servant without prior approval from the top, something that usually bogs investigations down for years. But the LG's office hit the gas on this one. And what's interesting is that they did this right when a completely separate procurement scandal was making news in Ayodhya. Instead of dragging their feet to manage political optics, the LG proceeded decisively with the arrests and that huge 74-doctor reshuffle.
Which brings us to our final thought. The broom is absolutely sweeping through Delhi's healthcare administration right now. But as the ED probe widens and as the hunt for that missing broker continues, we really have to ask, is this massive crackdown finally going to cure the systemic rot in public procurement? Or, despite all the arrests and the reshuffles, is this just one chapter in a never-ending cycle of corruption? Because at the end of the day, it's a question of structural reform that goes way beyond a single FIR. And that is something every taxpayer should be keeping a very close eye on. Thanks for joining us for this explanator, and keep questioning what you see.